We need to stop being so kind of snobby in the mining industry and look outside the box, because that's the only way we're going to survive and you're going to get all the people that you need.
Welcome back for another episode of Ore-atory, where we aim to elevate mining minds. I'm your host, Lindsey Schultz, and CEO of MRC Recruiting, and I have the pleasure of having one of my team here with me today, Samantha Larson, who is our Director of Talent Acquisition at MRC. And so I'm super excited for this episode because we were just recently at the Idaho Mining Conference, and Samantha delivered a really, really amazing I was going to say performance, but speech on mothers, millennials, and misfits. The future of mining isn't who you think. And I don't know if you guys can hear / see me beaming with pride, but she did such a great job of this and sort of came on the tail of multiple really technical sort of conversations on innovation. And so she was the innovative thought leader on this, which is what we love to talk about, people and how things should work and different ideas and all of those sorts of things. And so welcome today. We are really excited to have the conversation. And Samantha, thank you for being here.
I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. So, what was sort of the genesis of this? So, like, you had this really great idea, and we submitted the abstract for IMC. What was your thought behind why to do this speech?
So, I mean, we work in this every day. When people hire us, it's usually because they can't find anyone. They need someone to come in and really help them. And the mining industry is having a hard time filling the spots that we need to fill. So I'm always trying to talk to hiring managers or whoever's doing the hiring of like, okay, but we got to think outside the box. And why can't you look at this person? Or I know this doesn't fit exactly what you're thinking, but like, how can we make this work? We talk to people every day. We kind of have a good feel for people. So convincing someone else that maybe we should look at a different industry or look at something, maybe this guy who doesn't have the exact experience that you're looking for, but I'm telling you, like, I talked to him, I know he can do the job, I know he's quick, all these things. So the idea behind that was kind of to just make this like a widespread, like, get on my soapbox and talk to people and say, we need to stop being so kind of snobby in the mining industry and look outside the box, because that's the only way we're going to survive and you're going to get all the people that you need.
Well, obviously, I was in full support because I think the idea of broadening that funnel in is really important. And I think the title is really catchy and fun. But, beyond that, we're looking at some pretty serious statistics. And so you talked about how 50% of the mining workforce retires by 2029. What are some of the other statistics that we should be thinking of as we try to broaden this funnel?
Yeah. So 50% of the mining workforce is going to retire in the next 5 years. And then 75% of the senior leadership is also going to be retiring in the next decade. So all the people that are in senior level and above roles, they will be retiring in the next 10 years. We know, like, there's a lot of people that love mining so much and they never retire and they never want to shut that. But we also need to make room for the young people coming in. And then the other one that's really kind of like a huge issue is that the United States used to have 25 mining programs at universities, and we are down to 14. And I think that cutting those by 11 programs, they're already starting to come back. Like we saw a lot of the University of Idaho used to have a mining program that they are now bringing back and like getting back in the force. So we're seeing the consequences to those actions of cutting those programs, and people are trying to catch up. But in the meantime, before we can pump more students out, we have to figure out how to fill the spots of people that didn't go to mining schools, that didn't go to Colorado School of Mines, that didn't go to those traditional schools that we're all looking at in the mining industry.
Well, and I would argue that we shouldn't just be looking at mining schools, right? I think that we can go even more broad than that and say, hey, we need to be approaching individuals that are non-STEM to get them interested in mining as well. And so just an extension of sort of what you're saying, we're not going to pump out enough students in the next 5 years, much less the next 10 years, to make up for some of the shortages that we are seeing in mining. And so while I absolutely support that we have more mining focused schools, I think we also need to figure out ways of attracting talent from alternative backgrounds, from different schools that don't necessarily know about mining. And I had some really, really cool conversations specifically at the Idaho Mining Conference about how to do that and how to have those conversations. And so I'm feeling enthusiastic about it, but I think, a statistic that I've shared previously is that like we're roughly graduating 330 mining related engineers or bachelor's degrees out of mining schools in the US per year. And like, that's just crazy to me.
And how
Like,
many
that's not
spots are
even
yeah, it doesn't even fill any of those spots.
exactly. And so, kind of moving ahead from that, what have we been missing? Like, who are the groups that you feel we've overlooked?
So the big one that I kind of focus on is veterans, because maybe traditionally they don't go to school, or they definitely aren't going to these mining programs, but they have a lot of the skill sets that we need in mining that we can train and do on the job training. A lot of
Okay.
safety roles, even environmental roles, can definitely be filled with veterans that we are completely overlooking because maybe they don't, that's all their experience. They didn't have experience in the mining industry. They've
Yeah.
literally been in the military. And I know recently we've been working with a group that takes people that are fresh out of the military and is helping them to get jobs as civilians. And I think that we in the mining industry, we have been so like, we need this person to fit the box because it's always feast or famine, right? Like we're either not hiring or we needed to hire
Yeah.
someone yesterday and we never have time to do on the job training. So another thing that I was really focused on in this talk is that we really need to focus on pre-planning for these things of like, yeah, it's slow now. This is the perfect time to hire someone probably at a lesser rate than someone that you think is super qualified, and give them on the job training and like have the time to put them in a job that maybe they have the skill set, but they have never worked in mining. They've never worked in this kind of situation, and give them a mentor, give them the on the job training. Like in order to fill these roles, we have to get creative and we have to think about the different ways we can get people in them, because you're not going to be able to find people that fit your exact specifications of the role eventually, because we're all growing. Every company's growing. When we were at Idaho Mining Conference, everybody was growing. Everybody's getting funding. Everybody's like excited. And it's like, okay, everybody has a role open. How are we there's only so many to pull from.
I agree. And I think it's really interesting because I think in recruitment, in the role that you and I sit in, tends to be reactive, right? And so our clients come to us and they're like, oh my gosh, we've worked really hard on this. We can't fill it internally. We can't find the right thing, or we don't have the resource pool to draw from, or this person left and we weren't expecting it. And it's sort of like, okay, shit happens. But if we have the opportunity at times to be proactive rather than reactive, that sets us up for a whole lot of success. And so while things are lean, it is really hard to bring in individuals, and we're absolutely cognizant of that. I think that what's more than that is laying the foundation for success, right? Having a really strong onboarding plan, having an upskilling plan, having a leadership development plan so that you can do more with what you've got, use those individuals to have a really great experience internally so that then they can bring in the next version of themselves as they move through the organization, move up or move out or whatever that looks like. And so, another thing that you talked about were like career changers or somebody that's like sort of making a pivot. And we see that all the time, right? And so let's talk about sort of that demographic and what they add, I think, to our mining clients and companies.
So I have a soft spot for the career changers. So
Hi.
resume apps, because I mean, I am one of them. Like I started in the mining industry, but then I took 2 years off to be a yoga teacher and like own a
Yeah.
yoga studio. And then I also took time off to be a mom before I jumped back into the workforce. And I gave an example in my talk about someone that I worked with that had a mother who had Alzheimer's and decided to take 5 to 6 months off to help his family and to make sure he was getting her to her appointments and stuff. And then something, the economy happened and those 6 months turned into 2 years. And the longer he was unemployed, the more like he became this red flag when that was never
Yeah.
his intention. And we kind of helped him through a process of getting a job. And my point of that story is to be like, we are all human and we need to look at people as like, we're all humans, we're all having life experiences and stuff happens. And it's not always a red flag why someone hasn't been working for 2 years. Like he
Yeah.
was taking care of his family and then stuff happened and he got out of the workforce. And same with me, like, I decided I wanted to take a career pivot and go into yoga, and then I became a mother, and I also took a stint in technical recruiting. And I think all those different experiences, even the life experiences, build on your skill set because,
Yeah.
like, I can say, and I know you can say this, like, as a mother, I am way more efficient with my time and like things that I accomplish and my multitasking than I ever was before that. And I think that those things, like managing a house with 4 kids, has made me way better at managing my time as a recruiter. I'm way more efficient now than I ever was before. And I think we forget those things. We forget that we're
Yeah.
human and we forget that human experiences add to career experiences and your professional life too.
Yeah. And I joke all the time that moms get shit done. And it's totally true, at least in the experience that I see. And I was talking to a good friend of mine that I have had the pleasure of working with. So he's been a client, he's been a candidate, and we've known each other long enough that like we've mutually adopted one another and have become friends. And he was telling me a story about how he was giving his partner trouble because of whatever she had to do. And he's like, you've gone into mom mode. And I was like, but listen, like as women, often we don't feel that we can provide the information and say like, hey, my kid is sick, so I can't come in today or whatever. Because when we say that, we're like, hey, I'm busy, this is going to take till tomorrow. So like the origin of the story was that he told her like, it's okay to tell somebody I'm going to have this to you tomorrow. Right. And she said, but it's not because they know that I'm a mom and they know that I've got other stuff going on. And for me, they assume that because I'm a mom, I'm doing mom stuff rather than work stuff. And that's not okay with me. And so I overproduce, I overcompensate so that I get the thing in today because I feel like it's expected of me. And whether that's her experience, I certainly feel that as well at times. But I told him, I said, look, it's really important that you recognize as her partner, as her support system for her, that we should be acknowledging it's okay to have both, right? And it's expected because we can't make it all work. Like, who else is going to be momming that day or who else is going to be writing the proposal for the client? And so, yes, it is okay to say, hey, I'm going to have this to you tomorrow. But as partners, as others in their life, like, I don't know that we should be calling out like, oh, you're in mom mode right now versus like, super badass professional mode. So we had this chat and he was like, thanks for putting some perspective to that. And, he's a super awesome guy and a really good people manager. And he was like, you just gave me a different lens that I hadn't necessarily considered, that you guys have potentially alternative pressure. He's like, when I tell somebody I'm busy, they just assume I'm probably working or doing something like work related, not that I'm being a dad or that I'm making an excuse or that I can't balance both. And he was like, you guys are always having to contend potentially with that viewpoint that like you're dedicating to one or the other rather than both. And you're probably always thinking about both. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. And so it was a really interesting conversation from my standpoint. So I know we've gone on a tangent, but that was just one of those times where I think we both learned something. That I do love a career changer, going back to point or pivot, because I think they do bring so much to the table. And often we have customers that say, hey, we need somebody who's entrepreneurial. And when I see somebody like you that like went and opened a yoga studio or had a side business or, said like, hey, mining has been too volatile, I'm going to go try to do my own thing. And then they're like, man, I miss it, I want to come back. I'm like, okay, let's talk about all the things that you've learned, all the different things that you can add into it. And so the redesign on a resume for like a career changer or somebody pulling pivot is like my absolute favorite thing.
Well, I think if you can spin what you've been doing and how to change it, you can sell it to anyone. And I think that that's what happened to me. Like after I decided I didn't want to be in yoga anymore, I applied for a recruiting job and I like sent this note of like, I know it seems crazy that I'm applying for this job, but let me tell you like why I would be good at it. And she was like, wow, I can't, like, no one's ever like done that before. So I think that's where you like have to spin it. And in regards to the mining industry, I think that, we are kind of old fashioned and that we want to think that we want to do things the way that we've always done them. We don't want to change. And the way we've always done it is like, you're a mine engineer, you graduate from school and you start at a company, and that's what your career is for the rest of your life. But we have to remember that, if we want to fill these roles, civil engineers that went into different industries have kind of the same skill set that we can train on the job. They're still an engineer, they still have the degree. There are things that like we have to be willing to kind of be flexible on and look at differently.
Well, it's the two other areas that we haven't talked about yet on like who we've been missing. And I'm sure that there are lots more, but like these are some of the ones that you highlighted. And I think we can talk about today are women and Gen Z. And so we've sort of talked about women. So let's lean into Gen Z.
Yeah. So Gen Z, one of the statistics I shared is that in a survey, 75% of Gen Z candidates said that the most important thing to them when they are looking for a job after they graduate is that they're going to make a difference in the world. And I asked this, there was a panel at the Idaho Mining Conference of just all young students. And I said, well, does that matter to you? And how does the mining industry fit into that? And what became very apparent is, yeah, it does matter. And none of them knew why mining would help make the world a better place. So like, that's another thing that I'm like, we're not telling the right stories, because for me and you, like we sell this all the time. I'm working with a processing company that I'm like, if you care about the environment, if you care about green energy, this is what you need to go into. They're
Yeah.
all in that trendy, reduce, reuse, recycle. These people are changing the world by coming in and making these processes better and more
Yep.
environmentally friendly, reducing the waste that we have and making the world greener. These are the stories that we need to be telling that we are not
Yeah.
telling, because none of these Gen Z people, they are going into industries where they think they're going to make a difference. I also told a story during my talk a couple years ago. Boise State did a professional day. We had geology students and environmental engineering students come, and they had people from the state and mining and different industries. And then they kind of did a talk, and these are the areas and careers you can go into. And then they split us up into rooms, and I was the only one for mining. Only one student came in the mining room.
You
And
scared them all away.
my thought was like, it's kind of wild to me that we're just not telling the right stories, because for me and what we do, I feel like if you want to be an environmental engineer and you want to make the world a better place, your first thought is like, well, you're go work for a government agency that regulates these things and makes sure that everybody's following by the rules. My thought is you go work for the companies that have the money that can actually make a difference. And like, you're in charge of making your whole mine more green and hiring more people in that space, rather than working with a limited government budget to
Yep.
kind of just make sure people are staying in the lines.
Well, I agree with you. And I think we're not always telling the right story. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are really trying hard to influence that and what that looks like and educate companies on how to do that better. But I still haven't seen very many operating mining companies say why they're mining copper or gold or whatever it is, right? Like that these things then impact the broader society in the following ways, right? They're telling their own story and sometimes not even the really cool parts of it. Like, hey, we've created an entire community in a school and we've helped clean up the water supply or whatever the case might be. They're focusing on what they think their investors want to hear and how they're driving impacts and finances. And that's all fine and good. That is part of the story that they have to tell. But going bigger than that and saying like, hey, copper actually goes into creating medical equipment that makes a difference for getting scanned for X, Y, and Z, or, whatever it might actually look like, or that it's in all kinds of, infrastructure or building and blah, blah, blah. There's just a bigger story that we can tell. And it's so hard to get out of sort of the silo that we live in to be able to tell it well, I think. So anyway, that's a very different soapbox that we could talk about for a very long time. So I'm going to keep us moving slightly forward on your presentation. So I guess the next sort of portion that you talked about, sort of like that value shift. So like Gen Z is really saying like they want values aligned work. So what does that mean and what does that look like for employers out there?
Well, I think one, it's telling a better story, getting better job descriptions. I think sometimes we get kind of in the weeds and you just are telling like a very, like that's one of the things that we do is like spruce up these job descriptions because these hiring managers will tell us about the jobs and we're like, this is way more exciting than this piece of paper that you gave us. Like, let's
Yeah.
tell that story of why people want to come work for you and what they're going to be doing every day. And then the other really important thing that we all forget, which is like what I think I hammered on the most in my talk, is company culture of like it value. You have to feel like you're wanted. And I think a lot of that has gotten misaligned and people think like, oh, well, we put a tennis table in our break room and now we have company culture. When there has to be like really, really intentional and it has to be thought about. It does not just happen. You don't just hire cool people and then all of a sudden you have company culture. It
Yeah.
has to be intentional and people are going to stay. And that's like where we want to hire these people that want to stay with your company, want to help you grow, want to help you get to the next level. And in order for those people to stay and feel valued and feel wanted, there has to be company culture there. And I think
Yeah.
we in mining are really missing that mark because
Yeah.
one, we're not telling the right stories and we're looking at our people as just like another number to fill a spot rather than like a part of the team, a part of who's going to take us to the next level. And the people that are doing that, that are intentionally creating culture, that are very intentional about their hires, and they're like, well, this guy has everything we want, but this girl, she doesn't quite have it, but we know her personality is going to fit in better. She's got this mindset, and they're picking that person. They're doing better because I feel like in order to evolve and to like the people that are going to win are the ones that are going to say, okay, if I find someone who fits into the box, guess what? That's all they do is fit into the box. They're not going to help you to grow out of anything more because you hired them to fit into this box and that's what they're going to do for you. And so that was my biggest thing that I talked about was company culture and intention and bringing people up that you already have. Because
Yeah.
when we can keep people in roles and grow them instead of hiring always on the outside and making people feel like they're not growing in your company. And then in a
Yeah.
year, they're going to be gone somewhere else for another company that saw their potential. It's like, okay, where can we look around in our company and say, okay, Jane doesn't have exactly what we want, but how can we bring her up to this? She's doing a great job. She's loyal. She wants to grow. She wants to be important. And that's what people are looking for. When we talk to people, I would say 90% of the time, if I'm asking why they're looking, they're saying, well, I just feel like I've kind of hit the ceiling here and I'm not growing. I'm not learning anything new. That's super important to people. You want to like going to work and not just feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. And if
Yeah.
we can continue to create those things and be intentional, like how do we keep our good people? How do we
Yeah.
move them around? How do we keep them interested and excited?
Well, and I think some of the things that you've said, like developing a culture, it doesn't just happen overnight. It is an intentional effort, right? And I think that, we work with all different sizes of companies and different phases of the mining cycle. It could be technology companies, it could be operating, they could be consulting groups, and everybody's going to have a different culture. But if you're not putting intentional effort into creating one, then you can't convey that to whomever else might have interest in your company and then practice it, right? And so it doesn't take a whole lot, but it does take putting some thought into it. And a little bit goes a long way. I think the other thing that I wanted to comment on is like, you may bring somebody in, but if you don't help them to integrate and belong and have the skills that they need to be successful, like if you don't have a solid onboarding plan and then growth plan for them, that's a really bumpy start. And so, like, if that part doesn't go really well, the rest of their experience kind of goes from there, right? And so I try to tell our clients all the time, let's be thoughtful of how you onboard this person. You may be really busy. You may not have tons of time, but if you want this person to stick and be successful, we need to put some effort into that. And so like even just charting out various amounts of KPIs or certain things that are going to happen within 30, 60, 90, 120 days and beyond, that goes a very, very long way. Go.
Rewind and say the interview process is
Oh, for sure.
the candidate's first impression of your company. And if
Yep.
you are like, oh, well, I know you've already done 4 interviews, but I think I want you to talk to this. And just to make sure it has to be intentional, because I think that we forget those things, and we forget that I always say this. It is a mutual selection process. We are selecting a candidate, but they are also selecting you as a company. And if they have a bad impression and maybe they take the job, they had a bad experience interviewing, but they got excited, they got a job, like it's going to trickle into the rest of their experience. And then as things start to fall apart and they don't have a good onboarding, and then they don't have like a good training and all these things, like the companies that are intentional from start to finish are the ones that are keeping people and that have the good company culture.
Absolutely. But it takes time. It takes effort. And like you said, it's the intentional component of what's going on. And that doesn't mean that you're big enough to necessarily warrant HR or that you're using recruiters. It just means that you put some thought into what all of this looks like, that you've got a roadmap, that you've got some like idea of who you are as a group, why you exist, and how you function together and move that forward. But like one of the questions I always joke, so Heather, who's part of our team, whenever I do an intake call with a client, I like to absolutely like glaze right past, like, what is it going to look like for an interview process? Because I figure we'll get to that. And she always says like, Lindsey, did you ask them what the process is? Because she's really great at that. And like, she's got that HR background and she's done this a million times. And so now I've retrained myself to put it on my list of questions and be like, okay, let's talk about the interview process. Because if we don't ask them to think about it, often they don't. And then it's just this sort of like, ping pong ball effect where they're like bouncing between people and not having a really great plan. So, I think something else that warrants conversation is talking about how you keep these people, right? And so you had mentioned like upskilling from within. So that internal mobility, cross-training, tuition support, like other creative modalities to kind of keep individuals. And like, let's kind of lean into upskilling, reskilling, etc., and talk about that and its value.
That I think is a key thing that we're kind of missing. Like, instead of saying, I have this person in my organization now that has the potential to move up into a new role, but I need someone to hit the ground running in this job here. Again, there's a lack of intention and forethought into it of, okay, now we need a senior mine engineer. And we have a mid-level person, like, how do we get them to that senior mine engineer? We just say like, well, we need someone right now. So again, it's so hard to think about it when you're in the moment, but I always like to kind of tell our clients like, okay, well, like it feels stressful, but you are doing the job now without this person in there. So like, can you, instead of taking the 6 months it'll take to find someone, can we take that 6 months to train someone up into the role? And that's like taking us out of the equation. But in the end, it benefits everyone, because then 6 months from now, we have someone who is qualified as a senior mine engineer who, like could potentially go to another company eventually. But and you can't think about those things. I remember one time when I was in Barrick, we were in this interview and a young geologist said, well, I plan on going. They asked him like the really cheesy, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And he's like, well, I would love to, work 2 to 3 years here. And then I want to go back to school for a master's degree eventually. I always see myself having a master's. And so he walked out of that interview and some of the old geos were like, well, he's an automatic no. And I'm like, why? I mean, why can't we work with him to keep him? Pay for his master's degree, let him do his thesis on something here. And why that automatically a red flag? Honestly, if you're hiring someone, millennials, now Gen Z, the average time we're going to spend a company is 2.7 years. So get someone who's good for 2.7 years, but how do you keep them? How do you bridge that gap? Like, help them pay for the master's. Encourage them to go get the master's and come back. Work with things. Don't automatically see those people wanting to better themselves as red flags. Because I feel like kind of the archaic view that you graduate, you start at a company and then you retire there. That doesn't happen anymore. And honestly, those are the people that I kind of see as the red flag people that aren't jumping and growing and moving around. I don't think it's true in case for everyone, but I am always questioning, why have you been here for 12 years?
How do we not know you? You've never looked for a job before?
Yeah, the evidence has shown that companies are not helping people grow. So, like,
Yeah.
some companies do have this figured out and they're the ones thriving. And the people that are staying there want to stay there because they're continuously like challenged and
Yeah.
like have new things going on. But other companies kind of just let people settle into that lane and just let them like kind of coast by and do the job. And they never want to grow. And the companies don't help them grow. And those
Yeah.
are when people start looking for somewhere else to go.
So you had mentioned really early when we were talking that often when somebody comes to us, they say, well, I've sort of stagnated or hit a ceiling here and I'm not able to grow, or I really have found X work interesting and that work has ended. And so now I don't get to do that anymore. But I will echo that sentiment. Most of the time, people come to us not because they're not getting paid enough, not because people have this idea that they're just not getting paid enough and that's why they go look for a job. It's usually because they don't have the support that they need from leadership. They're being taxed, they're burnt out, or because they can't grow and there's nothing else for them. Or they've got a family circumstance that necessitates them looking for something else, right? And I would say those are the top reasons that I hear at all phases of career, not just Gen Z looking for opportunities. And so when we talk about trying to keep people, those are all compatible, right? Like companies can literally ask a few questions potentially and say, how can we solve this problem? And so I love two different ideas that really have not gotten off the ground in our industry, but other industries are using them pretty actively. And one is called a stay interview. And usually those are done far too late, right? It's usually when somebody comes to you and says like, hey, I got a note from a recruiter and I'm just letting you know because we have that relationship and like this actually sounds really cool. Like, can we talk about my role with the organization? Or a company might be more proactive and say, like, let's do a stay interview or like have this dialogue on a routine basis so that we can understand the motivations and what's going well and what's not going well and how we can support this person within our own group, right? So having that dialogue, I think, is really important. So I love stay interviews before it's too late. And then the other thing that I was talking to others about this year at the EMA Spokane Summer Summit, I was on a workforce panel and one of the people on it, he works at Core and is one of their, I think he's sort of like VP talent acquisition. And he said that they're doing returnships. And so the idea of a returnship, for those who don't know, is having a really senior individual who has all kinds of inherent knowledge and experience with the company, with the project, with the mine, with the geology, with whatever, who says like, look, I don't really want to hang it up. You bring them back. And so it's like a reverse internship. You bring the senior person back to mentor somebody more junior within whatever that capacity looks like. And so then you're getting all these really great stories from the senior member and experiences and like just packing that into the other person. And so those are two tools that I love that don't really cost a whole lot, right? And so I would love to see returnships take off because most individuals in our industry don't really retire. I mean, there are a fair amount that do, and we're talking about this sort of like cliff coming, but more often than not, I find people in mining work far longer than people in other industries and love what they do. And then like they move into consulting or advisory or board roles or whatever. And so like ask them to come back and give us that institutional knowledge because they would love it and we have so much to gain from it. So
I
I
love
think
that.
always.
One beautiful thing about the mining industry is like people do love it. Once you're like bit by the mining bug, you're kind of my father-in-law worked for Boeing and Boeing does something really similar. And he had people that were like in their 90s that worked at like consultants for Boeing and just like never left because they absolutely like loved what they were doing. And they would keep them on, like retire them, let them start getting their pensions and then bring them on as consultants to like
Yeah.
train up people and mentor people. And like that was
Yeah.
their full job. And I
Yeah.
love that. And then about the
Yeah.
stay interviews, I was going to say is that I think that that's part of something that should be very intentional. It should be like I think that we miss the mark when we're always on people's like yearly reviews, only talking about them and not
Yeah.
reviewing the company of like, it should
Yeah.
be a mutual thing of like, okay, these are the things that you did great this year. These are the things that you could work on. Now,
Yeah.
where did we miss the mark? What can we
Yeah.
work on? How can we help you in the next year to grow? Like, what are your goals? What extra training can we send you to? What kind of conferences can you go to? Who can we put you with to mentor you into something you might be interested in?
Yeah. It's true. And, it does take some foresight, but they're two of the best things that I can think of at this point that are lower cost without throwing money at people or whatever, with really not having tons of success because people don't
Yeah.
always just stay for money. So, moving forward, you had talked about sort of redefining leadership. And I really like that because you're talking about having inclusive pipelines being more important than hero CEOs. And so, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is that we have a lot of senior leadership that are going to be leaving the industry. So we need to figure out what looks different for our industry and how do we redefine it. That's where we're going to win. If we
Yeah.
can be like, I say this all the time, I'll say it again. The people that innovate first are going to be the ones that are going to succeed. A little off topic, but kind of on the same. People were asking, well, how do you think about AI? Is it going to take jobs in mining? And I'm like, I think artificial intelligence, the companies that jump on it and say, yes, we want to do that, they're going to be the ones that are going to succeed, that are going to bring more people in, different jobs, like different things. Like we can't be afraid to innovate and be different. And just because this is the way it's always been done doesn't mean that that's the way we always have to do it. And if that's what I mean with leadership too, like just because we've always had these sort of people in leadership roles, why can't that look differently?
Yeah.
Why can't
Well,
the mother who was a stay-at-home mom for this many years and she's been out of the workforce and now she needs a job that's less in production and more in leadership and like how do we make that work? How do we redefine what we're looking for?
I think that has a lot of merit and it's important to think about because we have the idea that we have like a checklist of all of the things that somebody needs to have, right? And sometimes looking at that and saying, and you and I have this conversation all the time, right? So companies will call us and say, we need an X, find us an X, and we're getting paid a premium to go and help and find X. Why would they want to make concessions? And the more interesting conversation around that, I think, is so today, for instance, I had a phone call with a potential client and we were talking about what the role looks like. And I said, I think one of the most important things that we can do is be honest with one another. What do you guys like being in candidates, having in interviews? What do you not like? Blah, blah, blah. And then for me to say, hey, the reality of this is that you have seen 5 candidates, and for us to generate 5 additional candidates that look just like candidate B, for instance, that you think is a rock star, may take 6 more months because they might not be looking, they might not be ready to make a move, and really everybody is different, right? And like this is just the moral of the story. So I know that our clients want what they want and they're paying for it, but in lieu of a human cloning device, sometimes there are concessions. And so the more interesting conversation to me is when we actually have a client like the one that I potentially had today in this call. And he said, listen, I know that they're all going to look different and everybody's going to come with something interesting and unique about their background and experiences. And I just want to see what that looks like. And so it was really cool for him to say that rather than me to head him off to the fact that what they're asking for is unique in a lot of different ways. But like he said, listen, they might not have all of the stuff I'm asking for. Let's just talk about them. And, if they're entrepreneurial, that would be great. And if they have this, that would be great. And if they're relationship builders, all these sorts of things. And so it's really nice when we have clients who are willing to admit that this is a human endeavor and we can use AI, we can use technology, we can layer in all of these different things. We might find a really great answer while using all of them, but that it's an iterative process and that it's going to change throughout the whole experience. And I tell clients all the time, you may come and say you want X, but you're going to hire Y. And that generally proves to be true. Almost always it changes course just a little bit because they all of a sudden see the reality of the situation. So it's not that we don't want to absolutely hit the target right on it. And often we do, and we get really lucky. But sometimes there has to be that meeting of the minds where we all have this mutual recognition that people are people and that they all bring something unique and colorful to the situation. Valued in that way is really, really important for the sticking factor and success and all of that.
But on that, like you and I, we talk to people every single day. And I think sometimes we will talk to someone that doesn't necessarily fit the mark, but we are like, I'm telling you, like, we love
This is it.
this person. Like, just trust us on this. This is your person. It looked nothing like you thought it was going to look, but I'm telling you, you're going to love this person and they're going to do a fantastic job for you. And
Yeah.
I think that that's why people hire us too, right? Like they might think like, well, I have this really hard role and I need you guys to fill it. But also like, this is what we do every day. Talk to these
Yeah.
people. And we can see through where they're missing things on their resume that are there. And also those are things that we kind of bring out like, okay, you have this skill and it's not highlighted on your resume. Let's bring that out. Let's make sure it's on there. But also bringing that to a client and saying like, listen, I know this person doesn't have this many years experience or has too many years experience, but here's why I think that they're it for you.
Well, it's funny because I think there's a level of like intuition that goes into what we do. And I used to be able to call it a lot better than I can now. And so perhaps my intuition is fading because I've just had all the life experiences sort of beat it out of me. But when I first started, and like I know that like we've all talked about it internally, but like sometimes you have that conversation with the candidate and you're like, this is the one. And we all get all excited and giddy and we're like, go present. And sometimes it does take another conversation with our client, but like we have that intuition at times where we're like, bam, this is it. And most of the time that does work out to be the case. Sometimes we have to pitch it in a different way or convince our client to talk to them. But, you know, when we do and they do, they're like, oh, I get it now. And so I always think it's like that magic situation when we get to see that happen. But you're right. And sometimes it's like just having the experience of having talked to all these people over the course of X number of years or going to a conference and having, you know, an offline conversation and getting to know them. Like we are present and the goal is to really know people. And it's hard to get to know everybody, but, you know, it's an interesting role to be in as a recruiter and you get to see them in all kinds of different life situations. So, you know, moving it forward, I think what we've talked about is that we basically, and I love this visual also on your presentation, which I know you guys can't see, but you said stop fishing in the same pond. And it's totally true, right? And so you have to,
where so and so used to work at this company, now they work at the and then we pull from them. I mean, even our clients will use examples like, okay, I mean, this is the company where we think we would like you to look for candidates and we can't directly match them, but you can. So, but here's the thing, like people can only move so many times and change companies so many times. And like, why are we're just all fishing from the same pool and pulling from each other. And then if we steal someone from this company, then now that company has a gap and like, let's pull from other places, other industries.
Well, and I would also put this out there that this is something, again, going back to that workforce panel that I did this summer in Spokane. We sort of pooled the audience, and this was all about workforce. And so we pulled the audience and said, like, is it better to just keep people in the industry, or do you want to keep them for yourselves at your organization? And of course, like the prerogative would be to keep them within your organization, but that more broadly, we don't want to purge them from the industry. And so like we all sort of need to be advocating and actively like doing the right things and all of the rest of the stuff to keep people within mining. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't draw new people in. And I think if we're doing a really good job of keeping people in, that they're our best source of advocacy to bring in the next group of people. And so like I did this presentation at Idaho Mining Conference with a panel, and we talked a lot about like, how do we broaden that silo? And so I think, doing a good job internally automatically draws more attention externally, but it's still a little hard. So I don't know. I think that kind of like sums up your presentation, but there's always so much to talk about. And Samantha is our expert on figuring out what to do with really interesting people and pivoters and moms and all of that. And so, reach out to her and have conversations with anybody on our team. We're always happy to do it. But we appreciate your listening and being here and sharing this conversation with us. Samantha, is there any like parting piece of advice or information or like a takeaway that you want to give our audience today? Now that I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't tell you I was going to ask that.
I mean, the point of the whole thing is that I think that we all need to be more open-minded on who we're hiring, who we're looking for, and what companies you're going to as well. We needs to be more intentional. If we can put
Yeah.
all the forethought into those, like where we can look and who we can find, then we're just going to make the mining industry better and better.
We have to have big goals and big vision for what we're doing. I think it keeps us all interested and on our toes. From my perspective, it is an iterative process. You don't have to have the answer. You will learn as you go along. I always tell people, be aware that you'll learn and you'll know how to do better the next role or by the end of this one. Use us really as a guide to figure all of that out. We don't just send resumes and do recruiting. We should be a layer of advisory and understanding. All of this is hard for everybody because when you're adding new people or replacing people in your organization, it does have emotional impacts. How do you manage all of those and figure out what to do? Sometimes it's literally just talking to somebody that you can trust and that it stays confidential and you can say, these are all the things that I'm excited about. These are the things I'm worried about. These are the things that I want. Like, just use your resources because I think it renders such better results when you can be open and communicative about what you're actually looking for. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that. So with that, we are approaching an hour mark. And so we will let all of you go, but we do appreciate your listening. You can follow us and like us and recommend different ideas for talks that we should do or areas that you're interested in us covering. Moving forward, we will be doing an MRC sort of round table on a quarterly basis. So look out for that, where we'll talk about all kinds of cool stuff. So certainly your insight on what you'd like to hear about would be music to my ears. So anyway, happy end of year. And thank you, Samantha, for being amazing and bringing all of this information to light.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye, guys.